This is Growth Guide, a podcast exploring the depths of curiosity, questioning everything in the name of growth. I'm your host, Brian D'Alessandro. We're about to pull back the curtain on the art world's past, present, and future. I'm incredibly passionate about this topic. I've always been an artist, was labeled an artist at a very young age, and struggled with many of the artist's current dilemmas. I received a bachelor's in fine arts from Carnegie Mellon University, yet despite graduating from one of the top art schools, I found it terribly challenging to enter into and make a living in the art world. I was even encouraged to be pragmatic and realistic from most of my advisors. I've thought a lot about what the underlying reasons are for getting this terrible advice. Now, I recognize how much we undervalue the arts in our current times, and I believe that connecting to the arts offers a lot of the healing and solutions that our society most needs. It offers us an opportunity to connect more deeply with parts of ourselves and our society that we might not want to look at. We'll get into this and much more shortly, covering innovation, diversity, patronage, as well as the emerging technologies in the arts. With me today is Muys Snijders, a seasoned executive and visionary leader with over 25 years of international experience working in the art world. She launched her own art consultancy firm and served as the managing director of Christie's Americas. Muys has a deep knowledge of the market for post-war and contemporary art, having led the division for Bonhams in New York, and prior to that, she was the global director of client strategy and private sales for this department at Christie's. Muys holds an MA in art history and classical archaeology from Leiden University in the Netherlands, as well as an MA in arts management from Greenwich University and an MA in art market appraisal from Kingston University in the UK. Muys is also a graduate of the Senior Executive Leadership Program for China from Harvard Business School, Tsinghua University in Beijing, and CEIBS in Shanghai, and most recently obtained a certificate in alternative investments from Harvard Business School. She is multilingual and has worked in London, Amsterdam, as well as New York. But don't be intimidated, as I know how much the art world can often feel that way. Muys is as approachable and inspiring as she is experienced. Let's get to it. Hello, Muys. I'm so excited for today's conversation. Someone so deeply steeped in the art world as you to really explore what growth looks like and means in regards to art. This is going to be fun.
Yes, no, thank you for having me, Brian. Really wonderful. We've been in touch with each other for so many years now, and I know that we talked a lot about ever putting this up as a podcast, and we've been talking about so many different variety of topics, but growth has always been one of them. So I'm super excited to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I think there's really only one place to start. While I mean everything that's unfolding in the world at large, but in the art world is really bizarre and exciting, and it's challenging these old systems we have in place. But let's get some context before and go all the way back to our art history, which you recently shared with me. You're actually a trained archaeologist as well, so this is just perfect.
Yes, no, absolutely, because you may hear a lot about NFTs these days and what an NFT is, and we will get into that a little bit later in this conversation. But in essence, to me, what that actually means, it's just another medium with which to transcend a message, or another tool, if you like, a tool with which we communicate, or a tool that we use and are going to be using in a daily context. So with that, if you go all the way back, if you trace millions of years back, I would say maybe 2,500 before Christ, something like that, what you will find is that a lot of people used, tools, right? And they started with tools, then they moved on to maybe pigments, and then they had a lot of daily objects they used, which actually we now deem to be artifacts. So that's a very interesting point as well. Like what we believe is an artifact actually may not have been an artifact at all. And humans lived, and they had a lot of debris that was left behind. And a lot of the debris was less susceptible than their own bones. So the bones might perish, but the debris might actually continue to exist. And as a result of that, we've been able to study that. And through that, we can derive how did these people manage to survive? What technology did they have? What's the dexterity? What were their mental skills like, right? Like, how were they able to innovate within their own little communities? And, I experienced that firsthand because I didn't just do archaeological excavations, right, where you really go deep into the earth and you unearth, like, really, sometimes you'd only really look at like so many square meters, right? And you would go a little corner of a house and you try to excavate that. But what I actually also did, which was perhaps sometimes more interesting, was archaeological field surveys. And we use tools like GPS and GIS, which actually looks at spatial relationship of people. And we used our aerial photography. So once we got the Greek army military base to fly over our archaeological site and take incredible imagery, and to show where the differentials were, right, in the landscape. And then we did remote sensing. But what we did mostly was we walked over that land and we looked at what was still there, because you had the farmers who would be plowing that land, and then all of a sudden all these pots and ceramics were pulled up and sadly sometimes broken. But we would collect the samples and we would know how dense, according to the density of the sample, we would know what civilization might have looked like. And then we would look at the actual shards of the pottery to determine how wealthy those people were. Because, for instance, if the pottery was glazed or if it had elaborate colors, the likelihood, of course, these are all our assumptions, but the likelihood is that these things are, that the families or the people that live there perhaps were better off. Sometimes you would actually even be able to determine what might be underneath. So the type of pottery could determine what was underneath in terms of was it maybe somewhere a bakery or was it some actually pottery maker? You're like, oh gosh, what's happening here? But there is so much you can derive from those communication tools. And I think what's interesting when we talk about artifacts is that pottery particularly. That's why I'm highlighting this pottery, because there was tons of other stuff that we would find, but that then becomes an artifact. So whereas at that time it was used for daily use, so it was used to pour water, it was used to carry things, it was used to drink wine from. There were cups. So, but like, for instance, in 2000, June 2000 was a big day for Christie's, for instance, where they sold a rat figure Kylix, which is basically a wine drinking cup, and it made 1.7 million. And then also what's interesting is that they started to attribute this rat figure Kylix to a painter, and they said it's by the Doris painter, and this Kylix was from 480 before Christ, right? And then they even started to talk about who's the potter, and they think it's the Python potter. And I still find that, incredible. Like, how do we manage to establish that it was that painter or perhaps that potter? But more importantly, all of a sudden, the name of that individual starts to become important too, right? It was by somebody who perhaps could paint more elaborately on these very everyday products. So I think this is a very interesting look at like how something that wasn't perhaps seen to be an artistic expression actually by nature of time has become something to do and worthy of keeping, and in that regard become an artifact.
Yeah, and that's a pivotal time that we reached when we started ascribing value to the artist who created wares, right? I mean, that's where this whole other dimension of the art world really emerges. And that also goes into playing with the power of who is funding the arts and who is creating it and what the marketplace looks like. And I know we're going to delve into that, but I think that's an important one to really unearth, because we accept the terms that are now, but I think understanding how that's unfolded and evolved is really important. And especially as the technologies, I love that you pointed out technologies, because back then a vessel was a technology. Being able to carry
Yeah.
a liquid from one place to another was, a huge innovation. And so these different technologies that existed, nowadays we have very rapid advancements in technology that's reshaping the art world. So I think, that's going to be a fun one to get into as well.
Yes, absolutely. To the point, like, what you're kind of highlighting is like the notion of the artist, and that really became much more prevalent during the time of the Renaissance, because there was a huge, reemergence of humanist thought. We're recognizing, we're celebrating culture. And you've got these very wealthy people like the Medici family who are supporting Michelangelo. You got the Sforza family like supporting Da Vinci. And Ludovico Sforza, for instance, commissioning for Leonardo da Vinci to paint a dome in the Santa Maria della Grazie, which ultimately became the Last Supper. But I think what's really critical there is that it has two elements to it. One is that the artist actually is an individual that needs to be immortalized and becomes more like a genius. But at the same time, there's a lot of propaganda here too. There's a lot of glorification. There's a lot of covering up. There's a lot of ostentatious expressions of wealth, perhaps, that and well doing and good doing, but may actually be used in a sense of like, oh, I marched with the French here, but now I'm doing this for you because I want you to really forget about that. But all these patrons have, from that time onwards, such an incredible importance in terms of like really defining how we see an artist and how we look at an artist.
Yeah, there's such a wild relationship there between, because there's the patrons who are funding the arts, there's the artists and that dynamic, but then there is how that's represented in society and what value society ascribes to. And so in the Renaissance, the arts were held in high regard, but as artists started really getting acclaim, there was clout that came along with them. Now, I haven't researched this, but it feels to me like the patrons were using the artists and the art being created as a form of media, the same way that, we'll use radio, TV, and, how newspaper, how all of that has played out and evolved. That was a way of getting your message out, connecting it to celebrity, right? I mean, because that was a celebrity, being able to increase the validity and power of your message and influence.
Yeah, and that would happen today too. Like the whole notion of artists rising stratospherically in their importance, but becoming their own brand in their own right. So I would argue, if you look at somebody like Tracy Ammon and Anthony Gormley, you would say Kusama, they're brands in their own right, and you see that how luxury and luxury industry, for instance, interconnects with these brands, recognizing full well that they're a standalone brand, so they would affiliate their brand with this existing brand. But the artists in the Renaissance were also very much their own brand, and were branded as such. Indeed, and I do very much relate to you, Brian, in the sense that their messaging, we need to understand, right, that they're like, most of what people would see would be what they would see in the church, what they would see on the walls, what objects were displayed for them in front of them as they would walk into one of these big Medici homes. So all of that was to show power, wealth, and like influence people's thoughts and minds, for sure.
And I guess that's why you had some of the most sophisticated artists hiding messages within these paintings, because they recognize the platform of having access on such a large scale and being able to put things there that at the naked eye might not be seen, but as you dig deeper, Da Vinci obviously being probably the leader in that space, but always having undertone. It kind of reminds me like of Stanley Kubrick in his filmmaking style, where there's the script he sold, and then there's like 3 subplots that he has unfolding. It could be a commentary on Native Americans, and like it's just really interesting how that platform gets used.
Yeah. And then what's also very interesting, that's also the first time where the whole notion of a place where we're gathering tons of objects kind of come to the forefront. So don't get me wrong, in Mesopotamia, 350 before Christ, we believe that we have found a museum that was full of antiquities, and that was an excavation that was done in 1925. However, having said that, like where it starts to kind of get, I would call, big, is when Pope Sixtus the Fourth start to give tons of sculptures to the Capitoline and creates a Capitoline museum, right? Like, so gives that kind of to the city. And again, it's the gifting that's really created. Then it's the Vatican that starts to open up and start to show artifacts, often also very much driven by what they wanted people to see and what people to believe. And then we have the universities started to emerge, and you get the universities wanting to keep artifacts, right? But they want to keep them mostly for studying purposes. And you've got the Smolian, which kind of came into existence in 1677. And then private collectors started to create these things called cabinets of curiosities or wunderkammers. And those were just a very eclectic objects, minerals, shells, animals, but also paintings, sculptures, everyday objects, things from different eras, things from current times, and that all gets kind of put together. So what we also see is that it's not just important to commission something and to get something produced, but also how are we going to preserve these objects and how do we make them accessible to more people?
We started touching on the patronage system. I think that's evolving a lot as our technology is changing, and there's this existing ecosystem between the museums, the curators, and the critics. And I know you are, really, that's your world, and you have a lot of thoughts around that, and I'd love to hear those, because I think there's such an interesting dynamic, right, between the person who's funding, the creator, and then who is curating this. How is it being presented to the world?
Yeah, exactly. And it really was with the time of the Impressionist painters. So the Impressionist painters where art sales were controlled by the Academy of the Beaux-Arts in Paris. And it was Gustave Courbet who didn't get accepted and was upset about that. And again, it's sometimes something that happens that is exclusion that leads to innovation. So the exclusion of him then led to the fact that he did his first solo show. But it also led that there were more people that felt like him and didn't really feel represented. And at the same time, what there were people that felt very strongly that these artists were actually good artists. And the most famous person that really believed in the Impressionist painters was Durand-Ruel. So that's the patron becoming an art dealer. And he basically took those paintings, he brought them from Paris to London, ultimately to New York, where he had a gallery up till 1950. So it was 1887 to 1950. That was innovation, it was entrepreneurship, it was good business sense, right? He very famously said that if he would have passed away when he was 60 years old, all the Impressionist painters would have been broke, including himself, and nothing would have come from it. However, he lived till 86. So longevity comes here as well into play. But he was really a patron that would provide the stipends to the artists. And also at the same time, like you could say, that's the first time talking about that ecosystem where the mega gallery or the mega dealer really was born, right? Like somebody, he would go in and very early on, like buy all the works in the studio of that particular artist and kind of onboard them into his community. And that community was a real community because there were doctors there that would work for free with those artists, and there were people that they would go to a restaurant and they would have a drink, and all of those things were it wasn't just that one dealer supporting this artist. It really needed a lot of people supporting those artists, right, through the good times and the bad times. And initially these were mostly very bad times, and then ultimately, and some of them very much never really even experienced the good times. But it was that strong belief of Durand-Ruel in those people about move forward this kind of movement. So that's really an important point, I think, of the patronage is the role of the dealer in it.
Yeah, and also the different takes or models that patrons throughout time have, taken on. You were talking about, the Renaissance period, where it was very much to further their position of power or leave legacy behind. Whereas then you have curators and gallery owners that are just passionate about the work, and they're truly trying to cultivate a space where art can be expressed in its purest sense. And I feel in today's day and age, from outside of the market, right, that we are so far from that, and we undervalue the arts in all aspects of our society. And commercialism drives so much of the behavior around that. And I think that's where, I'd love to get into the conversation of, is there an opportunity for a reset where with these new technologies, where art is more accessible than ever, where you can reach the people that you want, you have access to the tools, technologies, is there a way to be able to create with pure intention and have that supported by patrons or the system at large?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I honestly do think that anybody, like we have more tools at our disposal than we ever had before. So I definitely do think people can create. The question is, what are we creating? Who is it for? And what's the intent? Right. And what we're seeing right now is the creation can have many forms of intent. It can be to provide solace, to provide comfort to the creator and to the consumer, right? Particularly in these times that we're currently in, people spend more time in their homes. So we're seeing a lot of people actually looking to make great improvements to their personal environment. People are looking to innovate. People are looking to content, but also content perhaps that's more trustworthy, right? So we are overloaded with news content, and some of that news content is challenging at this moment in time because we don't really know what to believe anymore. We don't know what source is right and what source is wrong. And I do think that what is really great with the art that we see today, and again, thinking back, like art always is a representation of a period or a moment in time. The art that we see today being produced today is very much a direct reaction or creates a dialogue with whatever is going on in the world, whether we like it or not. So what I hear sometimes is people saying to me like, oh, the art that I'm seeing today is really challenging to me. And I'm like, well, that doesn't surprise me, because you kind of have to work out and distill what's going on in the world and why and how somebody might react to that. And sometimes it's not even like that. Maybe it's not a reaction. It's just an expression of an emotion. Like, oh, I want to paint a white blank canvas. Well, that's what I'm going to do because I actually believe in nothingness right now. That's what I need. I need to detox from whatever I'm taking in. I want to be minimalist. I need to declutter. Like that could be a reaction too. But understanding contemporary art, it can be very challenging for people because also we're living in this culture of immediate consumption, immediate gratification, immediate absorption. And some of this isn't about immediate absorption and immediate gratification.
So
you need to spend
disposable.
time.
Right. Yeah, I think that's huge. In a previous conversation, we touched on that. I mean, we live in such a disposable culture, and the idea of being exposed to art where you're like, yeah, I don't get it, or it makes me feel uncomfortable. I think that's exactly what it's needed, because art at its core, if it's a true expression of the underlying issues and it's this commentary of the social, political, cultural, even technological state of affairs, well, then that's mirroring back to us. It kind of plays the role that the comedians do. You don't judge the comedian, like, sit with the content of it. And if it brings something up, like, feel that discomfort, or feel that anger, feel whatever it is. And even if it's not yours,
inappropriateness.
yeah. And even if it's not yours, look at the opportunity for empathy and compassion to feel what someone else is feeling in the collective consciousness. And that's powerful. But then the other side of it is, when we're in such a fast-paced and disposable world, like, we spoke about this. Imagine a lot of kids today sitting in front of a Rothko for 30 to 60 minutes and just sitting and waiting. Like, it's just not accessible. We're trained to just move on so quickly. I mean, it's so hard for people nowadays to watch a movie without scrolling through social media at the same time, because they can't even wait for the next person to speak. So that's another question I have, is how do we create environments that allow people to drop in our current day and age and truly sit in the sensations of what the art is provoking?
Yeah, and that's I think, like, art always takes us on that journey automatically, and a lot of the time it will provide its own answers. So you don't really, I sometimes you see people want to control the artist or control the output, and of course it's done for very good reasons at times, because there may be ulterior motives. The artist needs more money, or the artist has been doing really, really well with something, and there's a lot of demand for it, right? Like, more people want that, and why wouldn't you share that? So those reasons could be there, but in general, I always think and believe is that if you let the senses flow, it will come up with its own answer. So what I think the answer to your question is, like, why is a child struggling to sit in front of a Rothko painting, even if it's for a full minute? And I do agree, their attention span is diminishing, as much as our attention span has already diminished significantly from our parents and even my grandparents. Like, my grandparents could memorize things by head, whole books, whole, like, language tables, which, in different languages, whether it was Latin or German or French. And then I didn't need to even do that anymore, right? And then my children are probably going to use Google Translate. So that's really where we go. But where it comes to the art, that minute of appreciation sitting in front of the Rothko, I think one is helping guide the child to understand what they're looking at, because that might change their senses. But at the same time, their senses are working, I would think, differently. So that's why we already have a lot of this immersive art experiences going on. So I used to go to the Van Gogh Museum, the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, but my children, I'm most likely going to take to the Van Gogh experience here in New York. And then I hope that they then are so curious about it that they also want to see the museum. So I'm almost doing it the other way around, but the experience is fascinating, right? Because you're walking through the whole oeuvre of the artist, and that's extraordinary in itself. So I think one of the biggest highlights of that particular exhibition is really that you see everything that the artist has ever made, which is much more difficult to do in real life than you could do in a kind of virtual world, right? Having said that, though, I don't think that's the end all. That's a reappropriation or redistribution of art that's already in existence. Where I think it gets truly interesting is if you start to look at some of the digital artists that are currently in existence, that create immersive experiences. Like the next museum in Amsterdam, again, this is where I'm from, this is where I grew up, so that's why I know it so well. It's a truly immersive experience where you spend a good 10-15 minutes with an artwork that talks about sustainability, about the environment, that talks about spatial awareness, that talks about surveying, and you come out with a true understanding and a deeper sense of what goes on in our community today. Whether my children, they weren't with me on this visit, whether my children would have the patience even to spend 10 minutes in an immersive digital exhibition, I don't know yet. So that would be a good test case to bring them in and to see what they're going to do and how they're going to react and how they're going to behave. But I do believe that will be an easier way for them to digest than perhaps walking through a traditional museum as we know of for many years now.
I agree with that wholeheartedly, and I had an experience recently that speaks to that. I also want to say that back to your Van Gogh, references. Yeah, I kind of created an immersive version of the Van Gogh Museum. When I first went there, when I was a teen, we picked up mushrooms at a local shop, and we went to the Van Gogh Museum after consuming the psychedelic mushrooms. And let me tell you, that became a very immersive experience.
I can imagine.
But anyways, I don't recommend that for kids. But back to kids, we were recently on a cross-country road trip, and we went through Santa Fe, and we found out about this show called Meow Wolf, and we had heard nothing of it. And so we got told by a few people that we should go. So we said, okay, we went, and we brought our son, who was like 3.5 at the time. And it's just a collection of artists that took an old bowling alley. They gutted the bowling alley. The artist had lost a dear friend. And so the whole concept was around paying tribute to this individual, but also the relationship we have with life here on Earth and the afterlife. And so this whole collection of artists explored that concept. And you're just moving through this, I don't even know how many tens of thousands of square feet it is, but intricate, installations by different artists everywhere, all with a common theme. And our son Koro, he played there for 4 hours straight, going through every type of experience, and, from static to like musical to electronic. And he was just consumed by it. And, you really saw it permeate into his being. And it was just, it was a really cool experience to see him get into an art experience on that level. So I agree with your hypothesis there. And that's my anecdote of how that played out with him.
Yes, no, I would love to go there now. If you can keep them occupied for 4 hours straight, that's a mom's dream.
Yeah, it was wild. And we just had to leave because he needed to eat food, and there was like no food there. So he would have kept on going. Wow. Yeah, I think these, experiences and immersion is a huge part of how art is evolving. And as you brought up the NFTs and digital art, that gets us into these new technologies, and they're indicative of the times. So it's only natural that we're going to use those to create experiences that fit with the times. So the question is, well, okay, what do those look like? What's the intention behind it? And as you said, where do we display them, and how do we curate them? Because that's another interesting one once it goes online and you're kind of in the Wild West.
Yeah, talking about the Wild West. So I think what's interesting to highlight there is that the art world really functions as an ecosystem. It's almost like the Great Barrier Reef. And the Great Barrier Reef, which is the art world as I see it today, it's really a kind of a separate thing. It functions it enjoys each other's company. Yes, it competes. Yes, there's the bigger fish. Sometimes they eat smaller fish, not so great, but there's definitely a lot of cohesion to it. So within that ecosystem, when I talk about that, like we have the art dealer, we have the board member who's often a patron, we've got the actual collector, now we've got the investor. That's also something that's changing in the art market, right? Like, so we got the investors coming in, then we have the museum curator, we have the art advisor, we have the auction houses. Like, so they all live, and to a certain extent they live in harmony with each other, one might say. I think what's been a bit of a challenge, and this goes to one of two things. Like, some people tell me the art market is in deep distress. Other people tell me this is the biggest kind of golden age for artists to produce. And one kind of doesn't go without the other, right? So what's really been happening is that even before COVID, and there's a gentleman called Benjamin Sutton, who is a wonderful art writer, and he wrote an article in the Artsy about the art market stagnating. And this was in June 2019. So this was before COVID even happened. And what he basically highlighted is, yes, the art market doubled in size until 2008. However, in the last 10 years, if you would adjust for inflation, actually the growth has stagnated and actually has shrunk a little bit. So think about that, where the art market was 75 billion, and actually, in fact, it's 64.4 billion, right? If you do all the inflation adjustments. So really, what's going on there, and how did this play into everything that we're talking about, right? Like, and the reason that the market stagnated is that fewer galleries were opening. The small ones wouldn't necessarily close. There's a lot of inequality going on within that art ecosystem. And also there was a real unwillingness to innovate or evolve. And I even experienced that firsthand working in the wonderful companies that I work for. It's like, well, just going on board with e-commerce or like basic technological advances were really challenging, because we were art history students with books and catalogs and paper around us, and we love that, right? Like, why would we digitize everything? Why is that really necessary if we have the book right in front of us and we can browse through it, and the physicality of browsing through the book actually is much more exciting and just makes us feel better. So yeah, what we're talking about is we're talking about pre-COVID, going into COVID, and uneven growth already. We're talking about trade disputes in a global market. The art market has gone global. It's no longer a local market. Actually, in fact, now it's perhaps becoming more local again. We're talking about COVID-19 coming in. We're talking about millennials entering this market. We're talking about all of these things that are focusing on the market and putting these kind of imbalances within the marketplace, right? So many of us already knew for a long time that something got to change. I think the only thing that's changed now is that it's been accelerated. So we're in a free flow. And that's also why when you read about the art markets become the Wild West, well, yes and no, right? There is the traditional system, but then now, because of all this new technology being on board in such swift and rapid succession, we are a little bit in a free fall. We're in a free flow. And to your point, like, where does the curation come from when we think about this digitization, this digital art market? I think to a certain extent, it will come from the people that are consuming the art, right? But then again, like, the amount of artworks that are being produced is so astronomically high. Like, I see single artists producing 3,500 artworks just since Bebo basically broke those records and we went into this free flow. But imagine the production of 3,500 artworks in space of kind of like a year plus a few months. That's incredible. So I think some of it is the people that interact with that market giving it its feedback, right? Maybe there is this huge revolution going on where finally it's not just 20% that's consuming art. Actually, it's everybody can consume this art. Right. How wonderful is that, actually? Like, maybe that's what we're seeing here. And then in terms of like the regulation, I think the people that are managing all these wonderful platforms that, Super Rare and Ethereum and like all the platforms that we've got out there, they have a responsibility here, I really strongly believe, in keeping this healthy and making sure this is ethical and that it's governed in the right ways, right? So that it is that it's protecting the people that are creating, and that is what I'm worried about here, probably the most. I'm worried about, like, are we being protected? And Kelly Crow just wrote a wonderful article in the New York Times actually last week about, the things that are happening to people in this market space. And that's unfortunate because it is an interesting thing. It's a beautiful thing. Back to the harmony and the ecosystem model. Yeah, you could almost say like the ecosystem was, and the barrier reef was getting a little gray. And of course, through our promotion and our marketing, we don't want it to look gray. We want it to look colorful and beautiful, right? But we go through these crises. We go through big market stagnation going on before, then we're going on through a COVID, like sales have slowed down, however you're going to turn it. Galleries have closed. Maybe that was necessary. Maybe they are going to go through re-emergence. So it's not all bad. I think from an artist point of view, there's been a ton of creation. There's been a ton of work, but then at the same time, we're also concerned, right? Like, we know that people are struggling, and how is that going to impact? So I think curation will come into existence. The ecosystem also is evolving now. So what is really wonderful to see is that the auction houses already adjusted, right? And if embraced the NFT as a new medium, for instance, and are actively working, are actively developing some governance pieces around some of these things, are addressing some of the issues, are highlighting some of the issues. So I think those things are very, very positive.
Yeah, it's a lot of pieces that are kind of shuffling around, and I think no one really knows what it's going to lead to. But I love the notion that you brought up of maybe there's this redistribution of art, so that the 20% that used to hold it opens up and everyone has access. And even if the the majority of the population isn't holding the majority of the wealth with art, they're still holding art close to them, and it's taking down that barrier to entry, because the barrier of the art world can be so stifling. It can be so intimidating. It could feel so stodgy. It could feel so stacked against the little person who just wants to have a piece of art in their life, even if it is to make an investment. But if you're comparing someone making a $10,000, $5,000, even $1,000 investment versus the $1 million, tickets that so many art collectors are writing, it's a new world. And I think the idea of everyone's home, everyone's sacred space, having art there that makes them feel, I'm not even going to say what it makes them feel, but makes them feel more deeply. That's a powerful shift. And, when we look at the lack of harmony in general with, at least my perspective of how we, look at the artists and how we undervalue the arts as a whole, I think that goes and takes a step towards starting to present value at a larger scale.
Yeah, no, and look, it's not a brand new concept, right? So if you think about street art and some of the very early ones, like Keith Haring, like he already had that notion. He went into the subways and started these subway drawings. He was very consciously aware that he wanted his art to be seen by a ton of people. And he then created this whole thing called Pop Shop. And Pop Shop is selling still to this day wonderful Keith Haring branded merchandise. And he felt very, very strongly about that. It wasn't just for certain people. It wasn't just for museums. It was out there to be enjoyed and consumed. Yeah, and I think that that's a wonderful thing. And I think we're going to see more. And, the street artists and street art movement has done this for a very long time and continues to do that. And then the digital artist movement did that as well. I think they just now have their perfect platform. Like this is because however wonderful we find these immersive experiences, they're expensive to put on. They take a lot of time and effort and coordination and a lot of operations, and the ticket sales attached to that as well. So you need to be kind of certain that you have a good audience and that it will be well received.
Mm-hmm. They're pegged to a geography.
They're pegged to a geography. There's a certain number of people that can go in. So I think what we're currently seeing is that the new technology is allowing us to widen the scope, and it is also almost like a sort of necessity, because we had this incredibly global art market, which we all believe is not really sustainable. And now we're seeing that the local market becomes increasingly important, right? Because people are not allowed to travel. They are located in a certain place and they want to know what goes on locally. But at the same time, you don't want to lose that global perspective either. Mm-hmm. So I think we're living in a hybrid at the moment where we're using new technology to consume things on a global stage. And then we're enjoying the physicality on the local platforms and in the local area.
Do you think we're going to see a shift or an emergence of new ways to view and experience art remotely or virtually?
Yes, I know a lot of people working on this. Yes, no, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of the experiences, however exciting in the beginning, because there's another element to this, which is the transparency, because the art market can be very insular. It's a very opaque market. There has traditionally not been a lot of data there to consume. And this also, again, leads to this barriers to entry and like a lack of confidence that people have sometimes in the market or making an investment or even just a basic purchase. Like, it's nerve-wracking. Like, is that work of art, is it really by the artist? What is its condition? What are things I need to look out for? Is it going to hold its value? Like, those are real questions, and it can be difficult to answer them. And then I'm not even talking like, it's a very emotional thing, right? Like, how will that artwork make me look? How will I be perceived if I'm associated with this artwork or with that artist? Like that also comes into play. So people are always looking for validation, but the validation kind of comes from the quantitative realm, not so much from the quantitative realm within the art market, or has traditionally been. So it's more about like how to navigate this marketplace, which has traditionally been very, very important. But the great thing is with the new technology coming in and an increased focus on data and data points, people have moved into our market to not only transform the experience in terms of how we consume, but also to transform how we interact with the market from a back-end point of view, which then allows us to create that intelligence that people really crave, that information. Like, yes, I like you, I love you, but I need a little bit more than just your voice or just your opinion. So that's going to create a whole new, new type of relationship. Like, what is the relationship of the transparency of the data points of the people that are coming into this marketplace going to do with what we currently have? And back to your NFTs, like, the cryptocurrency there has a play in it too. The blockchain has a big play in it. Like, you can go onto a website and you can see what these things are trading for. It's almost as if you go into a day trading site. Mm-hmm. But that's unheard of. We've never seen that before. And it's super exciting, but it's also nerve-wracking. If you're an artist and you're producing and your day trading rate isn't doing so well, what is that going to do with your psyche? What is that going to do with your ability to continue to produce? And we haven't really thought a lot of these things through yet. There's so much work to be done, but it is an exciting time for sure.
Yeah, that relationship between the data that comes back and how that informs the artist's creation. Are they then trying to create to maximize its commercial success versus just creating from a deeper intention? The other side of that marketplace is also, does that also intimidate potential buyers with these new technologies where they're entering into a space that's got a different type of intimidation? So once again, how can we make these experiences and platforms for exchange and purchasing artwork much more inviting and accessible to people? That, I think is a big area to solve for as well. And I'm kind of curious there. What advice would you give to anyone who's just looking to start bringing artwork into their lives, whether they're doing it purely as an investment or just because they want to be surrounded by art?
Yeah. Well, you can have it both. So that's always my best advice is if you buy purely for investment and it doesn't work out in the way you wanted, you could put yourself into a situation of a lot of disappointment. So why not always strive to buy something which you feel very affiliated with and may also be a good investment? So I think the first thing is to educate yourself, to basically go out in the open world and start to consume. And consume, I mean, read books, go to exhibition, ask tons of questions. Don't be afraid to ask those questions as well. Like, and particularly in our marketplace, it can be sometimes very intimidating, as you described as well. But people generally, I found, are very willing to talk. A lot of people are very passionate about the art that they live with, the art that they look at. So ultimately, they're very willing to share and have that conversation with you. So what you might perceive to be a very insular world and very inaccessible, actually, once you start the dialogue, becomes very accessible. I actually had a client who got a little frustrated with her collecting journey. So she did really well for herself, and she wanted to collect art. She had some idea of what she wanted to collect, and she felt that a lot of doors were closed, and maybe they were closed, and there were waiting lists, and it was very difficult for her to start her collecting journey. And what she did was very smart. So she stopped for a while. She thought she wasn't going to do art collecting at all, and then still something kept niggling on her, and she still wanted to do it. So she changed the parameters, and what she did was she started talking to a ton of people that were in that space and in that field, and she started to tell them what she was looking for. So sometimes it's not about, when you're chasing something sometimes runs away from you. So maybe stop chasing it, take a deep breath, tell people what you're looking for, tell people what you're into, kind of what you want to achieve, what your goals are, and guess what? People will come forward to help you. People will start to interact with you. And once you're in the flow, of course, things get easier. And then there is a ton of wonderful things that are online. If you want to support up and coming artists, I would say graduations are a really wonderful place as well, where they come fresh out of school, but the work and the quality is sometimes extraordinary. Look, if you look at it from an investment point of view, it's less set. A lot of times we don't know yet where those artists are going to go. There, it's really about understanding the artist and their practice and their commitment, right? Like, so we see tons of artists that come into this space and graduate as much as doctors would graduate, or people from other professions, and they never continue on. They do this for a couple of years and then they drop off. The same for artists. So, if you want to make sure it's a decent investment, like, just be mindful of what person have you got in front of you, what are their aspirations, what do they want to do. But more importantly, I would say enjoy and just collect with your heart, right? Not with your ears. And a very dear friend of mine, she told me that very early on. She said, if you want to be a real good art collector, collect with your heart and you will generally be fine. If you listen too much to your ears, because it can get overwhelming, or people are telling you, and indeed the data points are great, but it also can be overwhelming and there are too many of them. And then of course you can also, have people help you, right? Like you can employ somebody like an art advisor, and talk to them about perhaps what you want to do and what you want to achieve, and those are there, sometimes very affordable as well, and very accessible. So that's a great thing to do as well. But go see shows, go to the museums. Don't be shy in the galleries. You will be surprised. People are more willing and open than you might think.
I love that reframe you shared of your friend or client who was chasing after things, but instead started calling it in.
Yeah.
It's such a simple shift in approach, but so powerful. The other thing I want to look at here a little bit is there's always been this socioeconomic and political divide between who was able to own art and how everyone else got to experience it. And it was very, it mirrors the great divide that we've seen throughout history. And that's even more prevalent today than ever. But this new opportunity is for us to rewrite that flaw and that wound, that trauma in our psyche, with feeling that we can't be around art, we can't have it in our home, we're not enough to own something like that, or it's only for the elite or the rich, or whatever that story is that anyone holds. But there is a larger cultural narrative at play here, and I think we have the ability to heal through changing that, and by bringing art into our lives and changing the relationship, like you said, having a piece of art and talking about it. I mean, so many people are so uncomfortable to talk about art because they think they're going to say the wrong thing, and all of this nonsense that restricts us from really honoring the artists and our innate creativity. That's the invitation here, is to really explore it, try it on, see what feels good, and like throw away any of that baggage.
Yeah, and then particularly now, as we have all these restrictions, right? I would say start locally, start small and smart, start locally. Support that wonderful person that's doing the pottery in your area and makes these beautiful, beautiful plates, and take them home. Like, you will make his day. You will get the most beautiful plates to eat from, and you will look at them every day and they will make you happy, right? So I think, like, sometimes people want to do all these big things, but I'm like, no. Let's just look at what's right in front of you, almost what's in your garden, what's in your vicinity, what schools are there, right? Like, what art schools are there? How can I support these art schools? How can I connect with that new generation of artists that are going to come through the ranks? And look, people that are really truly about investing, it's a little bit like, like when you take stocks, or you build a stock portfolio, perhaps you will take positions on 60, and some of them will really go through and become the next big thing, and some of them are the dogs, and they will never do anything. And then there's some, like, in the middle, where you're not going to lose some, you're not going to win some. And maybe if you look at it that way, that again will make you less nervous, and it's going to be less about, like, what is my ROI and how long is that going to take, and what percentage uptick am I going to get by day X or day Y, right? And don't get me wrong, there are people in our market that do this in a professional kind of way. But if you're a starting collector and you're not entirely sure where to start with your heart. Think about taking positions in 60 of these artists and start tracking them. Start to look at the data, start to see what they're going to do. And soon you will understand, and you will kind of get a feel for, oh, they've just been published, or they had an article by this important newspaper, or this art critic is talking about them, or guess what, they just had an exhibition in a local museum. And how wonderful is that? Or you know what? They just minted their first 25 NFTs, and on the crypto platform, they're skyrocketing. This is exciting. And you will feel that same excitement that the artist will have, and you will kind of grow with them together. So I think it's just a really wonderful way to think about a new way of patronage, right? Like it's a new way of maybe creating that support, and it doesn't need to be this incredibly wealthy person. It could be you. It could be you in your home, in your local community. And guess what? You're going to be surrounded by wonderful objects that you're going to remember. It's a little bit like when you go and travel somewhere and you take back that little souvenir, that beautiful woven basket from Kenya, or this incredible little shakti that this person sold you when you were visiting one of these pyramids. It's a similar thing, but it's right in front of you, and it's everywhere, and it's on your doorstep. So don't feel intimidated. Start to explore. Look at the world around you. Look at what you can do, and look how you can become the patron for your local arts community.
Mouse, you're incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective and really opening up the world of art to so many people, and helping us to see how the growth in this area is really opening up the accessibility.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. And I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thanks for joining us this week on Growth Guide. A big thanks to our sponsors. This episode is sponsored by Project New You. I'm a huge fan of their Nitrovite nootropic brain supplement. It's helped me to develop laser focus, a better memory recall, and motivation. Nitrovite has helped me in launching this podcast amongst completing many other projects. Visit growthguide.love/focus to learn more and use promo code GROWTH for 15% off. This episode is also sponsored by Morning Man. Live manly, own the morning. I learned about this from UFC champ Frank Shamrock. He was always having trouble getting started in the morning without like 7 or 8 cups of coffee. No exaggeration, I've seen this in person. So he created this product that's packed full of 45 superfoods, and it has 95 milligrams of clean caffeine, so you get that charge from the greens and also get a hit from the caffeine without feeling all jacked up. I'm definitely caffeine sensitive, and I like this product because it doesn't make me feel like I'm bouncing off the walls, but I feel sharp and energized to get shit done. Visit growthguide.love/morningman to learn more and use promo code GROWTH for 15% off. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Atmananda Yoga. You guys have got to check out their yoga alignment mat. I've been using this for a long time. As you know by now, I've studied and trained with them as a yoga teacher, and the mat is incredible to deepen your practice and to ensure a lifelong injury-free practice. Visit growthguide.love/alignment for more info or to buy. Be sure to use code GROWTH at checkout for 15% off. Make sure to visit our website, growthguide.love, where you can find freebies, exclusive content, and subscribe to the show so you'll never miss an episode. If you found value in listening, I'd really appreciate a rating on iTunes. I can't tell you just how important this is. Or spread the love. Tell your friends, your fam, heck, tell your spirit animals. And follow me on Instagram at growthguide.love. Be sure to tune in next week for our newest episode.